There's an unfortunate discomfort among many American Christians with emotional pain, with the feelings of anger or sadness or fear and its related feelings. We're good news people, right? Gospel people. We just choose joy. The amount of times I heard from the pulpit, well, you know, Christians ought to be the happiest people in the world. I can't count them. And for a traumatized little kiddo like me who wanted people to be happy with him, this was like sacred anointing for my tendencies of repression and bypassing, you know. My most common prayer as a kid was, God, please make the bad feelings go away. Looking in this room, I know some of you can relate to that. Maybe that is something you still experience. Or maybe it's just something you knew all too well in a previous season. And I came to become a youth pastor in this culture, and I passed that on in my teachings as well. And one of our favorite proof texts was Philippians 4, which is actually a text I still like to this day. But it was used in a hurtful way by the tradition that brought me up and also in the way that I passed it on. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Did anybody sing that song? Yeah. It gets pretty raucous for like a 1950s, 1960s hymn, you know? And we would say, well, you know, the word joy that we have in the New Testament, you know what it means, right? It doesn't mean happiness, because you can't just choose to be happy. It means content, which is a state of mind, and you could just choose to be content. And that's what Paul is saying here. And we would say, that's what the Bible's saying here, and we would imply, that's what God expects from you. You got to choose contentness. Now, I want to get something out of the way real quick here. It doesn't actually mean contentness. This is going to really shock you. But the word that we translate joy or rejoice throughout the New Testament, you know what it means? It means joy. It means happiness. It is that emotional experience that we feel when we're like celebratory. We're happy. So it doesn't mean contentness. It's not actually referring to a state of mind, you know. It means happiness. And second, even if it did mean contentness, that feeling of calm that seems to that often accompanies us when we just are satisfied, that's still very hurtful to put on top of people. So I was a brand new youth pastor at a church in McMinnville, Oregon. My little brother's youth group. The two little brothers were in this youth group. And one of our youth sponsors, who I was just getting to know, was in the room. And I'm preaching on this passage. And she ran out of the room crying. And I would find out later she has clinical depression. And here I am telling her, hey, just choose joy. In fact, God expects you to choose joy. You're sinning if you're not joyful. She never volunteered with me again. And rightfully so. Rightfully so. This is something we call spiritual bypassing. Have you ever heard this phrase, spiritual bypassing? Spiritual bypassing, as the name implies, is when we use like spiritual beliefs or phrases, words, or practices even to get around our emotions or our problems. I heard somebody say, well, spiritual bypassing is when we try to ascend over our problems, you know, like I'm just going to pray my way out of feeling this way. I'm going to pray my way out of being so sad that my parent has died. Because I got to put on a happy face, right? That's a lot of the pressure that you experience in this system. And it's one that's not unique to the world I grew up on. I think this is very common in our society as a whole. If this sounds familiar to you who like never grew up in the way that I did, you might be more familiar with like positive thinking. And I'm not talking about like the positive thinking movement where you just use your thoughts to manifest things in the physical worlds. And I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about the like, hey, just be positive, Blair. You know, we're in the board meeting and you're like, I see a potential hang up with doing this thing. Hey, I don't want any Debbie Downers in here. Be positive. Yes. If I was writing a book, that would go in it. That's just perfect. And I actually think like there's a lot of power in trying to reframe how we see things, trying to find things we can be grateful in. In fact, I think that could be quite life-sustaining, especially in some of our hardest moments. But we can't run away from our issues. When we're trying to spiritually bypass something through like our positive thinking, that issue doesn't go away. It's still there. We're just trying to shove it aside and pretend it's not there. It's an immense and hurtful dishonesty to ourselves and to the people around us. And I think to God. So, I was thinking as I was working on this, you know, I've learned a few things through my own journey of emotional and spiritual growth, and I want to pass that on. Let me start with like the first thing, and that is feelings are value neutral. They're not good or bad. They're information. Some feel better than others, but they're not good or bad. You know, feeling sadness is awful. And it's completely the appropriate response when you're experiencing something grievous. Experiencing fear is terrible. I hate that feeling. I don't even watch horror flicks. I don't like it. I've got enough things that I can like worry about in my life, you know? Some of you are like, what a shame. What a shame. Some of you I know, like, because this very issue is the reason you watch the horror flicks. You're like, I want the catharsis of going through this in a safe environment. I get that. I don't want it. It's what we do with our emotions and feelings that matter. Like, what are we doing with them? You know? And this is a conversation I have with my kids all the time. Because it's very common for a 3-year-old or an 8-year-old, as my kids are, to feel a lot of shame when they act out in a way that's hurtful to themselves or their sibling. And I'm like, you can't stop doing that, right? But the feelings are still there that undergirded why they acted out. If they're hungry or thirsty and dysregulated because of that, or overtired, Imogen. Yeah, I know, it's a big one. Only for kids, though. Grown-ups don't get overtired.
They get overtired, too.
Yeah, we just drink coffee, and that need to sleep just goes away. Yeah, right?
Right?
So, you know, that the amount of times, like this is a weekly thing, sometimes daily thing, where I'm like, Imogen, it's okay that you're upset, but you can't punch your brother in the face, you know? The upsetness is a reasonable response. I know, you just want you want Brio to play with you. I get it. I get it. And you need to like not be stepping on him right now. Like that's a poor Brio. Like this is we've got some older siblings in the room, right? You know the pressure of like the younger sibling who's like acting out, and you've got to be the calm one because you're bigger and stronger, at least for right now. Ah. So that's the first thing. Our feelings are value neutral. They're information. And I know sometimes they go awry and they feel uncontrollable, and we have to recognize that reality. But for you spiritual bypassers in the room, or those of you who maybe live in this environment and are constantly feeling bad about it, I hope you can acknowledge how you're feeling is how you're feeling. It's not who you are. Okay? And the second thing I want to bring up is trying to identify when positive thinking starts turning toxic. All right? You have this optimistic perspective, and that's good. In fact, I think that could be really great. I love having the optimists in the room with me. But when is positivity turning toxic? These are things that I've thought of. These are not like from a book anywhere. These are just some of my own reflections. And they're ones that I was going to say, oh, I've seen this, but I feel the need to be more forthright with all of you. These are things I've done. You know? I've done or I've experienced the flip side of. You know, they've been done to me. And before I get into these, we're talking about an issue of like spiritual health that intersects and collides with mental health. Please do not take this as a substitute for mental health therapy and counseling. Please go and see a therapist or a counselor if you can. But I hope these are helpful in addition to that. First, positive thinking turns toxic when it's evasive, trying to negate a feeling. You know, you're trying to like feel your way out of a feeling, think your way out of a feeling. Second, when it's mischaracterizing a bad thing as a good thing. All right, I got beat up by the school bully, but it's actually a good thing. You want to know why? Because it's toughened me up. They're gone. They're in a better place. And I know some of you are like, golly, you preached on this before. I know. It's part of this, though. All of this, like, weaves together. Number 3, when it's insincere, phony, faked. I was in undergrad with this guy who would wake up so disturbingly happy every morning, and I hated it. I hated it. It was so Ned Flanders. And it felt like it was just faked. Just, he's plastered this smile onto himself. And he's trying to fool us that he's really happy. He's also trying to fool himself that he's really happy. Sometimes our detectors just go off and we're like, I'm so uncomfortable right now. And I think it's some of that. But I've also done that. Especially when I was like at camp and I'm just waking up myself and there's these kiddos around. And I find myself sometimes doing it now as a parent because I don't want to disturb my kids with my pain. I get it. We don't always feel like sharing how we're actually doing is appropriate. And I'll get into ways to deal with that in a second. But we don't have to fake when we're happy. Number 4, when it's incentivized or rewarded over sincerity. think of the board of yes men approach. Sometimes that's a system we're in. You can't voice dissents. You got to just say, yes, this is a great idea, right? Number 5, when it's the only option and challenge is punished. So this is the counter side, the board of yes men. What will happen if I'm the lone voice that says, actually, this is a terrible idea? Will I be fired? Will they make my job worse? If I complain about the hours, are they then going to retaliate by making me do those same hours? Or take on somebody else's load? Number 6, when it prevents going through a natural and necessary grief and healing process. Pain hurts, obviously. And it's part of our lives. There's many, many painful situations we just have to get through. And if we try to avoid the pain, we're actually making it worse. Number 7, when it becomes a substitute for necessary corrective action. Yeah, this is a hard one. There's so many issues and problems in our world. And part of the reason why we may choose to just put on a happy face, I'm just going to try to think positively about this, is because they're overwhelming, right? You have a health issue. You got this annoying cough that won't go away, and then one day you cough up blood. And you're like, I don't want to deal with this. This is terrifying to me. So I'm not going to tell anybody about it. I'm just going to be happy. Or, going beyond the individual, I live in a society that regularly engages in hurtful practices against my neighbors or against me, and this breaks my heart. And I can't have my heart broken today. I don't want to have my heart broken. You know what? I'm going to just not think about that. It's all going to work out in the end. Right? So that's all warning signs for me of like when my optimism has really kind of taken a turn. The bananas are now overly ripe. I now have the toxic positivity. So pay attention to what you're thinking and how you're feeling. Don't let positive thinking turn into toxic positivity and its own form of spiritual bypassing. That's the first thing I wanted to share. And the second is a way that I have found helpful for facing the pain. Now, one of the gifts of our spiritual ancestors in the pages of Scripture are their laments, their records of lament. And one of the reasons I find this to be a gift is because we don't have a lot of models on how to articulate pain. And for those of us who do want to spiritualize, it's helpful to see these books that we revere often have folks that we kind of respect doing it. Or some folks we respect. Some folks we're also like, that guy is awful. I don't like it. That's also there. 1/3 of the Psalms are laments. The prophets are often filled with laments. Obadiah and another book named Lamentations are entirely laments. Yeah, it's cheery. And Obadiah and Lamentations don't ever really give us like a helpful ending. They never like put a bow on it. Many of the prophets, they start off with like, hey, something bad's it's coming. We need to get our house in order. Oops, it's here, and I want you to know why it's here. It's because we were awful to folks, or you were awful to folks. And then it has a later person add on there after the situation's passed, like, and God helped get us through. And, which I also kind of appreciate. We even see these books and these kinds of writings in the New Testament. The book of Revelation, which is a quite disturbing book at times, is disturbing because it is its own form of lamentation. The writer's hoping these things are going to happen. Why? Because they're in pain. Their community's in pain. And Jesus himself, in the Gospels, often articulates what we would call a lament. He enters Jerusalem at the beginning of the week of suffering and cries as he knows what's going to happen to that city in our writings. The last night before he's arrested, he goes into the garden. And even though he's got an angel attending to him, I just picture he's sitting down and this angel's like trying to rub his shoulders, He cries and he sweats so seriously that he's like sweating blood in the Gospel of Luke. And he says to God, Lord, Father, if it's your will, take this cup from me. I'll do what you want, but I would really like you to take this painful thing facing me. What is that? That's a lamentation. Shortest passage in the Bible, Jesus wept. And then we've got the passage we read this morning. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. It's okay. It's okay. So how do we lament? I think we need to simply engage and articulate the pain that we're experiencing. I wish everybody had a trustworthy friend or partner that they could just vent all of the feelings with, and I know that's not the reality for everybody. I wish it was, especially in the different seasons of life that we have. Maybe all of you are in a season when you've got that person you could just pick up the phone and cry with. It would be nice. For me, I've had a practice that I go back to again and again, and that's just talking to God. It's just praying. And I've been praying by going on God walks since I was like 6, I would just go on a walk and talk to God about what I'm going through. And I used to feel bad about articulating the hard things, and then, I learned God's got big enough shoulders to be able to handle my belly aching. Amen. I might not always know what to do. I might not even know what I'm feeling. But if I can start talking to God about it, I start facing these things that I often am trying to run from. How am I actually feeling? Am I okay? I don't think I'm okay. God, is it okay that I'm not okay? Because if there's one person who knows what I'm going through, it's the God who's always with us. So, I'll go on a God walk. I'll go on a long drive. I'll sit on a riverbank. I'll go to the coast. And it's often when nobody else is around. I don't have to parent. I don't have to be a strong partner or maybe a friend for somebody else. And I can just articulate what's going on within me. That's it. Now, I have this book of spiritual practices that says, and make sure you always pair it with gratitude and all of the things going well, because we worry about people spiraling down. We're so concerned that people are going to just spin out. And if that's you, I think that's smart. But I also think it's okay to just tell God and to face yourself the hard things you're going through. All right? So that's what I do. This is what's hopeful for me. A few years ago, Stephanie was out of the country. I'm sharing a personal anecdote, and I got Brio's permission to share this. And Brio was 5, and he missed her terribly. It turns out I'm not Mom. And even though I was trying to do a lot of the Stephanie things, it just I wasn't able to fake it. I wasn't able to fake being Stephanie successfully. And one day, one evening, I think maybe 3 or 4 days into her being gone, he started yelling and screaming and crying. And some of the stuff he said was like rather hurtful, like at a 5-year-old level, you know? Like, ow. And then I sat with him, and he later said, I felt like I was having a tornado of feelings. Just one of the most astute things I've ever heard in my life. And I said, you know, that's really overwhelming. What if we tried to deal with it together? You know, we can't go around that tornado of feelings, but I'll keep you company as you go through them. And maybe we can find another way to deal with them. You know, we have puzzles and books, and maybe we'll go on a walk. I found water is magic. Sometimes we just need to drink water. But whatever it is, just committed to sitting with him, and I'm not leaving. And I think God is like that with us. I often need God to be like that with me. To be that parent who sits with me when I'm going through a tornado of feelings. It isn't going to bail on me because I'm too much. You know? And I think we get to do that with other people too. Maybe you're that person for somebody else, and I think that's a wonderful gift, especially if it's reciprocated. Sometimes we get to be the hands and feet of God, we say. I think sometimes we get to be the ears and the shoulders. You know? We get to sit next to those who are in pain. And instead of telling them, hey, it's all going to be okay. Your terminal cancer diagnosis is, it's going to be okay. You know? You could just sit. Say, I know it's not okay. But I'm here. I'm here. Your tornado of feelings isn't going to scare me away. God is present with us in our pain, even in our tornadoes of feelings, helping us be honest with ourselves, emboldening us to get the tools we need. Maybe that's medication, maybe that's therapy, maybe that's a spiritual practice, or permission to be honest. Walking with us on our path of healing.